Hey guys, we have another episode of Marketing Minutes here for you. In this episode, Nate sits down with Michael Sanchez. He is the owner of L&J Painting, and they talk about a bunch of different things: Facebook ads, SEO, direct mail, lead tracking for campaigns. They talk about maintaining data integrity and also an important topic of like sustainable business growth, along with Michael sharing a bit about his backstory too. So hope you enjoy it, and here it is.
So Mike was just telling me that, he started the year off kind of with a marketing plan that was, hey, I need leads. Let's go find some people who can get me those. And it wasn't much of a plan. It's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, heck, you got to $1 million in like almost not even 2 years, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we got there. It was painful, but we got it.
It's so great, man. I just love stories like this because, you're not in a huge market, you haven't been in business for decades, and it's just, it's awesome. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure people are telling you that it's awesome all the time, but I think it's awesome too. Even though I work with mostly painters that are a lot bigger than you, it's still awesome. I want you to know that.
Yeah, no, I'm having a blast, and like I'm chatting with people who are bigger than me. It's just like it's great because you could just pick their brain.
Yeah, and that's it, right? Like it's the same thing I do too. Like Caleb and I went to the Top 500 conference a few weeks ago. You probably saw because we've done some podcasts about it. And I mean, all the businesses there basically, I would say on average, they're 15 to 150 million. And then there's a lot that are over $1 billion. I think there's 5 now. Home service.
And those are like
businesses.
all home services.
Yeah, but not the specialized trades. So there's no plumbers, HVAC. Those industries are not there. It's more the general. So it'll be like windows, gutter covers, roofing, like anything that's not like a specialized trade. Like a good way to think about it would be like if there's a union, they're not at this kind of conference. So like,
sure.
The plumbers, the HVAC, they all have their own stuff, right?
Sure. Yeah. Specialized. You got to get licensed and all that.
So they have their own conventions. I mean, the window people do too, but this one is more for those more generic trades. So, but okay. I know you were telling me, what's working is website SEO, referral. You've done some reactivation, done some networking, some door-to-door. Your Facebook kind of not so much, your direct mail not so much. Like walk me through it. Maybe walk me through your year. Like I love that. Like just tell me the story about your marketing basically.
Yeah. So starting out at the beginning of 2024, I knew that I needed leads because I wanted to grow. So the first lever I pulled was hiring a marketing agency to do Facebook. And so I guess the ads kind of started like in late January, but they hit the ground running. And we got a crap ton of leads, but I found out later as it progresses, like the lead quality, or maybe as you put it before, I heard you say, the buying decision is so early with those people that those converted really bad. Like they were like a 30% conversion lead to estimate. And so that kind of drove up costs of marketing, and it kind of threw things a few off. But so that was on. Occasionally lead services is on. Kind of like, home advisor, any leads, Thumbtack. I kind of toggle those on and off as needed.
Okay.
And then what else was on during the beginning of the year? I would say that's, and then I do have a website and SEO, which has just kind of been pumping since I started. So that one's slowly kind of growing. So that's kind of what we had on. And so then Facebook, as I found out, wasn't really working. We went into Google LSA. That's great. It has its pros and cons, which I'm sure we can go down to. Like a lot of times people would call me for a question, like existing customer would call me and click the link. And it's like, oh, great, thanks. It just costs me money. But
we have the same thing. Yeah. Everything you've said so far, we have the exact same thing. So keep going though.
Yeah. So I don't know if I like to keep that one on because it's almost like you're paying for nothing there. But
it might get worse too, unfortunately, because Google's talking about maybe, combining with their map pack. And that will make it absolutely worse. It'll be very good for Google and very bad for us. But so keep going.
All the more reason to become a master of marketing here is what I'm trying to do. So then once I found out that Facebook was kind of slow on that end, I tried to look for different sources. So then I did some EDDM, which is every door direct mail. That worked. Well, I kind of did that in house a little bit we have a commercial printer for what we do for our newsletters through our past customers. So I just did that, and that worked again, but it's a pretty slow process. You got to pump out a lot of them. And then the other thing I did was then, so once I tested it and I was like, okay, it works, I went and hired a vendor for direct mail. And the reason why I don't think that was as good is because they just basically kind of created their own list of based on like income, which may not, I mean, you guys know more about direct mail than I do, but from what I've been reading, it's kind of like, that's not like the only criteria. So that didn't perform as well. I mean, an interesting metric on it though, is 75% of the leads that called in for direct mail got an estimate. Right. Yeah. So it's very, very small response rate, but those people like are interested in painting. And then out of that, we closed 50% of those. So it's almost like once you get the slice of that pie, they come in, it works. So you really just the name of the game, I think, for direct mail is like honing it in. So you're only targeting interested people.
75%. Okay. Let's just stop for just a second. So what percentage of those are calling versus like filling out a form or something like that on your website?
You saying for direct mail?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like out of the way we do it is whether someone calls or fills out a form or whatever, the first thing we do when we do an intake call is figure out like, where did you hear about us first? And so when those people say, I got a postcard in the mail, then we just categorize them as direct mail. Whether they called or put a form in or whatever for our website, we just change it to direct mail.
No, I understand that, but I mean more of, I see you have a form on your website. How many people are filling that form out compared to how many people are calling you?
Oh, so I don't have a way to track that.
Okay.
So I have a way. So basically I just track how the lead comes in, but not like the method it came in, like if it was by a phone call or whatever.
The only reason I asked that is 75% sounds really low to me. I want you to know that. Like,
okay.
That I think for direct mail leads, it should be like 95% is what we have.
Converting to estimates.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that makes me wonder, like, well, are we not answering the phone and then you're just calling everybody back? Or do we have too much friction on the website? Like you aren't letting them book directly onto your calendar, right? So that creates friction because they know for a fact they're going to fill this form out and then they're going to have to talk to you, right? Or they're going to have something else have to happen. You didn't check anything off their list.
That's right. Yeah. Right? So that's like a good point.
Yeah. So that's partly why direct booking is so nice, is that they know like everything that's going to happen. It's like, oh yeah, I got this done. Like they're going to come next Wednesday and give me an estimate. Right. So, but I wonder because that will save you a ton of money. If you could get that number up from 75% to 95, that might be a little bit of the issue with Facebook too. Before you even go past direct mail, let's stop for just a second, because I want to give you some commentary about a few things. So I think you're thinking of this differently than I am, which is I don't think 1 in 3, like when we get Facebook leads, we try to convert about 1 in 3 to an appointment. Like that's actually what we try to do. If we convert, in fact, I know and Jacob Ransom might even watch this. He might disagree with me about this. And a few of the other Facebook experts might, and it's okay. Like there's different opinions about lots of different things. But at least for my partners, if we get that number too high, it usually suffers like lead quality. You see what I'm getting at? So it's almost like, well, I need that to be at a certain range, because what I found is Facebook leads, like you mentioned, are never as good a quality from my experience. So I would like the speed to lead, to like filter a lot of them out. And so we do. And so, yeah, the lead cost might be $40, but the way we're looking at it is the appointment cost is more like $120.
Okay.
You see what I mean? Point. So we and that we're like sort of unapologetic about that. The second thing is like, well, that sometimes takes a whole bunch of time. Like we might only convert 20 to 30% in the first couple of weeks. So like initially when you do a Facebook, it might only be like 20% in the first like 10 days after you get the lead. And then you're going to look at it and be like, holy crap, this is not what I was expecting. Yeah, but you will convert more of them over time if you have a system to work that list, right? And keep adding value. And so We
So
don't
that's
do any.
that's a good point because like I was coming from not doing Facebook and but I still did lead services and other things
Yeah.
and website.
So
And so
you've got the
I was
hang of
looking
that.
at 60%, which I thought like, okay, well, Facebook, in my mind, I thought Facebook was going to be around like 40 to 50% conversion, but it ended up being 30. But it's nice to know that somebody's doing a lot of volume with Facebook is saying
Yeah,
like
I
that's
think.
probably healthy.
I mean, Mike, just think about it like this. Like, okay, I mean, the lead aggregators are really difficult, but let's give the lead aggregators the benefit of the doubt and say that they went to some website and they like looked at content relating to painting and they clicked on, I'd like to get some painting estimates. Like I know not all of it works that way, but let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, they're raising their hand. They took action to themselves to go look on the internet for something to do with painting, unfortunately found the lead aggregators. I mean, we all hate this process, right? But let's just be honest. This is how it works. They get to this old house, they get to whatever, all of these huge companies that are funneling all these leads to the lead aggregators. Just so you know, they don't all go to Angie's website like that. Anyway, so, but the initial action of the consumer is they took action relating to painting. The only reason that your success rate is lower with lead aggregators is there's two reasons. One is they sell it to so many painters, and two is that they're like kind of shady the way they do it sometimes, right? Like they'll have all these like weird websites where it's like they have buttons checked for like painting and a bunch of other things, and then you call them and they're like, I wasn't interested in painting. Like the lead aggregators aren't the best kind of businesses, but
Yeah.
if it worked the way it could work, like it wouldn't be, so bad because at least people are showing interest in painting. The difference with Facebook is, well, not necessarily. Like, what we found is like, sure, they clicked on the ad and they might, the form is relatively easy to fill out generally on Facebook, which you can add some more friction there, right? And many people do recommend that. But you just got them in between, they're scrolling, looking through food, they're looking through supermodels, whatever they're looking through on their social media. And it just happened to catch their eye, something to do with painting, but they didn't take action. Like, they didn't specifically stop their activity and go look for painting.
Sure.
Right. So if you think practically like the difference in these kind of marketing tools, like, yeah, it makes sense that the lead quality would be less on Facebook. Now I know what the Facebook marketers are all going to say. Well, Nate, in an ideal world, they saw 12 of our ads on Facebook before they ever did okay, sure. That would be great, but I don't see that generally happening. Right.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I think what I see is, generally speaking, our Facebook ads are definitely further up in the buying decision, and it might take more time. It's the same with door knocking. Have you done that?
Yeah, we do door knocking.
Yeah, I think it's the same. I really prefer not to book appointments at the door anymore. I prefer to think about it like Facebook, where it's like I'm bringing in warm leads. People are raising their hand and saying, I'm interested in painting. And then we're going to work those leads over weeks and months to appointments, because otherwise our success rate and our average job size just suffers so much.
Yeah, I agree. And so, so that's a good point. And so I don't really know the good metrics for Facebook because it's kind of hard to know if it's like me or if it's the content or if it's the agency or if it was a combination of things or, election year. Like there's so many variables. It's like, well, I don't know. Is it that? Is it this? Or maybe we just suck at it. Like,
I don't know. Like, I don't think, I mean, we were shocked by our November numbers. Like my team had a huge misstep in this because 4 years ago, the election was like a big suck on the marketing world. Right. And so we were like trying to prepare then of just like, okay, no one's going to pay attention to anything the last week of October, the first week of November. So like I turned everything off. And then we saw our numbers for November, like, they came in just a week ago or so, and we were shocked. Like, I wish I wouldn't have done that, just so you know, Mike. Like, I don't think Americans were enamored by the election nearly like they were 4 years ago. And almost all of my partners had double the lead volume in November that they had last year. And in some cases, even more than that. And like, we could have had way more than that if I would have been so conservative at the dang beginning of the month. Because honestly, like the first 2 weeks of November are way more valuable than the last 2 weeks because of Thanksgiving. And I basically cut one of my primary weeks out, if that makes sense with marketing. So I don't know. I think some of these things, people just are looking for excuses. That's been my experience. I mean, I can just tell you 17 partners across the country. I don't think the election had huge impacts on any of our marketing stuff. We tried to work around it. I'm not saying, but I don't think like if you're metric driven, I didn't see that. Like, I think
Yeah.
we saw, just as much potential those weeks, and I wish we wouldn't have turned things down, honestly.
Yeah, and
So,
that just goes to the thing of like when, especially for this 2024, it was more of like 2023 was for us was like a shotgun blast. When you knew, you just shotgun blast the map, whatever comes in, you go and you do the estimates for. And so if I look at our customer maps of 2023, it's like peppered everywhere. 2024, it's starting to kind of get a little bit more localized. And so I see that and I go, okay, great. So if these are our customers and these are the areas that we do good in, plus they're close to the office, like let's kind of focus in on a little bit. So I think 2024 was great. It just allowed us to kind of get really good data and get honed in. And so that's kind of what my plan is for 2025 is like honing in on both our customers, like customer profiles, the localities, zip codes, neighborhoods and stuff with a combination of things, which includes, direct mail, EDDM, flyers, and then also just yard signs. And of course we get the referrals and the websites.
I know you're like super metric driven. So like, can I have permission to geek out with you a little bit and show you?
Yeah.
Okay. Because normally I would never show anybody this stuff because like painters just hate this much geekiness, but I can already tell by the way you are that you might like it. So, other than like Caleb, if you guys have met him, who I train, he's like even worse than I am. Like he's awesome when it comes to this stuff. So, but can you see that, Michael?
Let me jump on. I'm on my iPad chatting with you now.
Okay.
So let me just jump on this computer here just so I can see it bigger.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah. So hopefully Mark Polis, I don't think he'll care if I'm showing you some of this stuff. So, but he's one of our partners, right? I just pulled one up randomly. So, but this is the way we look at geography. So these are all the zip codes, 252 zip codes, right? That he's in. He's in the Chicagoland area. Okay. And then we look at like, well, how much did we do per zip code of sales, year over year? How much growth? Mm-hmm. How many estimates in that zip code? What were the sold, so we can get the SR, and you could see, like, look at this, even though 60010, even though it's one of our top for estimates, we only sold 12 of those 41. So we're diving into that of like, well, what the heck's happening there, right?
Sure.
And same thing with average job size. You could see there's huge variations. I mean, all the way down from $5,000 to $10,000, right? And I bet this is true in your area too. If you start diving into the data, you'll see that there's huge variations. These are a percentage from direct mail. So again, we want to go into some of these kinds of things like specific marketing tools of like, okay, well, what happened there and what was the SR? And you could see, look, we only sold one of the 6 estimates we did. So the SR was terrible. So I want you to know, like, the way we look at this is we don't necessarily just go through these zip codes and say, okay, we're never going to mail to 6,000, 60005 again. We need to figure out the why, right? And then if we feel confident about the why, then that might be the conclusion, but it might not. We might have just missed on the target or the timing or the messaging, like there's a bunch of factors. And that's
sure.
We use the data to really start the conversation of like, what's happening here, right? And then how much revenue is it generating? But for us, I mean, most of our decision making is just pure metrics. It's just like, well, we clearly want to go to zip codes that are generating more sales. And you've heard Caleb talk about it. Like Paris has tons of zip codes that are over 1 million because we've worked so hard to really start dominating neighborhoods, right?
Yeah.
And you could see the trajectory that we're on even with Mark with some of these where it's like 300, 400% increases. It's like we're already starting to build up those neighborhoods, right? Like that's a big part of like what people don't see. And you're only a year and some into business. It's like, we haven't had enough time to dominate neighborhoods yet, right?
Yeah.
So like it does take time, like, particularly if you use print ads like flyers or direct mail. It's like, yeah, it's going to take some time to really start building that up and getting the kind of return you want. I think I've shown you this in a different video. I've shown this in a different video before, but like this is the way we look at like a tool like direct mail too, is like the response has like a tail, right? And I don't know if I've shown you this or you've seen this before, where it's like, well, we're only going to get 40% in the first month of the response. And then we're going to get an additional 30% in month 2. And then it's really going to trail off after that. But 50% or I'm sorry, 60 here. Can I even count? 30% of the response doesn't even come till month 3, 4, 5, right?
Sure,
6,
yeah.
right? Like, and I think that's another thing people don't really understand about direct mail is like, there's a long tail. So are you kind of measuring it that way of like, when you drop that postcard in February, actually all of your response isn't going to come until the fall.
So that's interesting. So, I mean, you look at it as far as like in a monthly way to measure the tails, but you're also doing it sequentially. Like you're also mailing that person, wherever it is, 4 times a year.
Yep. Or even more. Like if you've heard Caleb talk, we'll mail more than 4 times if we think we can keep adding value.
Okay.
Right. So like when people ask like, what's the right number of times? I would say like, well, how many times could you add value?
Yeah.
A lot of times painters can only add value twice a year. So, but if you could add value 10 times a year, like it's always better to go deeper, right? Because what's going to happen for Mark Polis is like, if we kept diving in, for instance, to 60047, he's at 300% success rate. Like it propagates itself, right? Like you start getting way more referrals, you get more yard signs, you get more, like, it's just, you start churning into a neighborhood and all of your marketing just starts working way better. And so like, I wouldn't be so worried. I know, you didn't say this to me, but it's like, okay, Greenville, it's not the biggest place in the entire universe. Man, I thought a year ago, like, oh, small markets, like, I don't know. No, there's huge advantages to being in small markets. Like,
yeah, I don't think there's like I think the market cap's huge here. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, Sherwin is the biggest one here in the Southeast. Obviously, we're from Minneapolis. I don't even know if Sherwin has that.
yeah,
many
oh yeah,
stores
we're big Sherwin.
Okay, we have 40 stores here within an hour. So I mean, the market's here to do the work, but it's just a little bit more spread out. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've seen in smaller markets is like, there are some things that are harder, right? Like, but there's some things that are easier. Like if you do LSA ads, like, yeah, I understand what you're saying about LSA, but they generally, what I've seen, are more effective in smaller markets because there's just less competition usually. And there's just less competition overall. Like lots of stuff is easier. Like Google ads are usually easier too, is what I've seen, because again, I'm not getting bid way up by all these big painters in a big market. So honestly, like Google ads is a perfect example to me of like almost unequivocally, I have a harder time with Google ads in the bigger markets. The biggest markets my partners are in, the more difficult it is.
That makes sense.
It's just simple. Yeah. It's just like, because they're all bidding the numbers up and it's like, well, $16 is too much for us to pay for a click. There just gets to be a tipping point for us, at least, where it's just like, let them have it. Like we don't, we'll go spend our money elsewhere if they're willing to spend that kind of money on a click, So, but I'm kind of wandering around a little bit here, but I wanted to encourage you, like, if you could start building some trackings, since you're such a geeky guy, I can sense that, like, start building some tracking down. Do you have anything where you could track per zip code?
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to share.
Let's do it. Let's look at it together.
How do I, 1 second here.
There's a button at the bottom that has like an arrow with a circle around it.
So like, well, first we do it by, like you said, by source. And sorry, we'll close this out. Can you see perfect. That? Yeah,
I can see it. It's perfect.
Yeah, it does it by source and percent of revenue, how many leads, estimates, and jobs, and what's our marketing spend, and what's our average job size and stuff like that.
Can I make a recommendation before we even go forward?
No, please.
Don't give them an option to choose website as a source, because it's probably not how they took the action. Like what you want to track is why did they contact you? And like, it's not because of your website.
Yeah.
So you want to get rid of that.
That's a good point. So none of this that when somebody like submits a form, they don't pick the lead source. We're asking them 4 times, and then ideally those are all the same answer, but probably it's not. So we ask them on the call how they heard about us. When they get a survey in the mail before an appointment setter or before the estimator shows up, they fill it out, and sometimes those match. And Then I ask them again at the appointment. And then finally we ask them again at the closeout walkthrough. So if all 4 of those match, then we know. But if any of those are different, then that's when we kind of look and go, okay, well, maybe. But we ask them like, hey, how did you first hear about us? And sometimes they'll say, I just Googled you, in which case then we would probably just put that as a website. But to your point, sometimes people click a Facebook ad to go to the website. They fill out the website form and we go, how'd you hear about us? You say, hey, they say the website. And until we figure out the difference, we just put them under that category. So I would say these are probably like 70% accurate, 80% accurate. It's not 100%. The lead source ones are easy because
those,
so we know.
I mean, wow, you're really an overachiever in this area. Like we only ask them once, just so you know. So we don't ask them 4 times. I think for us, we take whatever they say. Like it's a data point.
Okay.
So, and then what we do is we have like, how did you hear about us in our system? And that's separate from what we call our source, because our source, we will look and see if we have a UTM or if we have a call tracking number or whatever we might have. And we can like figure out like, cause this happens all the time. Exactly what you mentioned is like, well, we could see that we sent a postcard out and 3 days later they contacted us. It's like, and it might come in as a UTM from our Google click, but it's like, that's highly likely that our postcard influenced that. So then we have some steps that we take on my team to determine whether we think it's more likely. And if they're both paid ads, then we'll usually give the UTM to Google in that case. But if it was an unpaid, it's like, no, we'll give it to the postcard because that's more likely. But we just go through a process like that. It's called matchback, if you've heard that term before. And a lot of the bigger marketing companies will do. Because even the Google information, it's like, I think people think it's so accurate. No, it's not. Like we go through that every single day. It's terrible. Like it's just as bad as anything else we do.
if you just like, and the reason why we ask 4 times, if you sometimes people just blow you off. I Googled you, but it's like, so that's why we ask 4. But to your point, So, but anyway,
but the reason I was poking on this a little bit is like, well, your data integrity is like so important because it's like, well, if we don't have these things right, everything we're about to talk about is like, it just becomes like a moot point, right? It's like, well, we got to make sure we've got it. So
that's true. Yeah. So like I said, I'm confident that I can base some decision on it, but there's ways to refine it with the matchback system, which I've kind of built on Excel to do for our direct mail. But anyway, so this is kind of like year to date, whatever. And then I do summarize it by like city and month. And then of course, like zip code. And so zip code here has like the revenue, how many estimates we did, what's the percentage of the total, what's the bid size, what's the average job size, revenue per bid, and then sales rate in these areas or whatever. And that's kind of what I've been tracking to figure out like what zip codes are great. Like this one, for example, we got 15% of our revenue from, and it was a pretty good job size, 4,000 compared to our bid. It's a little bit lower, but good.
But that's good. You know, you'll want to look at that because if that's so great. You're really on the right track. Obviously, you've seen a lot of stuff that Aleph does probably already, so you know that we're doing a lot of the same things.
Yeah, and
sometimes that difference between bid, average job size, and sold has more to do with sales skill, but you'd want to suss that out whether it had anything to do with lead quality. The cool thing is if you sort this by sales rep, I mean, I know you're just getting into having a second sales rep, but that's usually telling immediately because it's like, well, usually what we'll see is like there's big differences between the sales reps. So it's like, well, clearly this isn't lead quality, right? Like,
sure.
Like, oh, and then we see like, oh, we've got a sales rep that's pulling this way down. And it's like, okay, well, this isn't, this zip code's still really good. Like, our ROI numbers are partly of being affected by this sales rep, not so much by. So, and it could be something just as simple as like, oh, it's really far from their house. Like, I know it just sounds so crazy, but it is some practical things like that where it's just
I mean, there's just a lot of data points to think about. I mean, luckily for us for 2024, I was selling most of it. I was like 80% of these sales are me. I mean, I would say even 90% because our sales reps only been really doing it for like October, November, and December. So I would say that this is the best that I can do. Obviously, I'm not the best. I'm not a great sales rep. And so but at least we can kind of get an idea. But I left that idea of like maybe having somewhere to kind of track like, hey, this is per this guy's sales rep or per sales rep or whatever. So that's kind of what I'm looking at.
When you're a selling owner, it's interesting. I think my experience is like selling owners usually think they're good at sales, because their numbers are like pretty good. But I think that usually their numbers are pretty good for two very specific reasons. One is they have a lot of repeat referral that almost always come into the owner. And two is you're the owner. Like that actually is like a unique thing when you go out and give an estimate, right?
Yeah, for
And it
sure.
gives you a big advantage. But actually, I would say like a lot of selling owners aren't very good at sales. And you figure that out when they hire like a good salesperson, because they'll see like, oh, a good salesperson could actually do this way better than me.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like, it's a big revelation to them because they just assume they're really good. And they kind of had a big advantage just because they were the owner.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree.
So,
I think the owner, playing the owner hat, definitely gives you a good
yeah.
5, 10 point swing easily.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, people feel like, okay, well, if I have a problem, I'm just going to call him, right? You know, so
Yep.
it's a little bit more trust there. So yeah, so to your original point, which is like tracking it by zip code, but I guess my next hurdle that I'm trying to figure out is like, great. So if I figure out the zip codes and I figure out where I want to spend money on and I figure everything else out, I want to obviously sequence things differently. Like I expect some leads to come in through website, and I expect some leads to come in through our door knockers. I'm expecting some leads to come in through referrals or our reactivation campaigns. And so the difference between what I need and those kind of passive kind of sources, the variance is is the lever for paid marketing to figure out like, okay, cool. So then I need a X amount of leads for this month to meet that.
Yep.
So then when do I do it and how do I sequence it and stuff like that? That's where I'm kind of just digging through the rabbit hole here.
I mean, we jump past that a little bit here, but yes, like you already know, I will make a marketing plan for the whole year. First, I'll determine which, how many appointments do we need from direct mail? How many do we need from, SEO? How many we need from Google? So on and so forth. Plan every single lead for the entire year. And then I would go into month by month. That's the work we're doing right now for our partners, is we're building out marketing plans per month of like, okay, we're going to need 12 from Google in February. We're going to need 16 in March. We're going to we literally do that work. So every single month is planned and we have goals for every single month. And then once we do that work in the coming weeks, we'll do the geography work that you're kind of talking about here of like, okay, we got $4,000 in March that we're going to spend on direct mail. We got $6,000 in April. Like, what does that look like, right? Like as far as geography, right? And usually in a case like yours, we'd only pick like 5 zip codes that we're going to focus on because we don't, you've got, looks like dozens here.
This is every zip code. So I would say the biggest ones are like 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that would be it, man, for like the size you are. It's like, because what are you trying to get to? 1.4 next year?
Yeah, maybe like 1.3, 1.4.
So I know this is a controversial thing to say. This is what I think about door knocking. I think door knocking is great if you're a $400,000 painter and you're just trying to hustle and get some leads. And I think it's great if you're a $5, $6, $7 million painter and you like have a real business where you have a general manager and you could have like a team either out, door knocking, right? Everybody in between, it's like a lot of work to do it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't, but it's like, well, if you don't hire a full-time door knocker, they're not going to take it seriously. You're going to have a ton of turnover. It's going to be terrible. It might work. You might find like this college kid or something that's just brilliant. And God bless you if you do that. And I'm happy for you. But our experience is better if we have a door knocker that's like a professional adult who like this is their job and they work like 25, 30 hours a week, right? And they make like a full-time salary, but they just don't have to work quite as much because door knocking's hard. And they do it all year. It's not seasonal, right? So it's just like, well, you want to have a whole staff person who does that? Like, do you have space to have another staff? Like maybe, because you're a smart guy, maybe that is something you could do. But I feel like for a lot of $1 million painters, that's a lot. So it's like, for me, I would generally just say, probably not doing flyers, not doing door knocking. It's just too hard. I'd focus on direct mail. I'd focus on Facebook. A couple things like that. You've already gotten some traction. They're probably easier at the size you are to implement, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, I can, I understand what you mean. So what is your thought process or delineation between like direct mail and like EDDM? I mean, do y'all even mess
Mhm.
with that?
Yeah, we do all the tools. So we do EDDM. We do what you call blitzing, right? Where we drop postcards around a project we're painting and say we're painting your neighbor's house. We do list-based mailings like you were talking about a little bit earlier too. And then we do some things like Aaron at 2 Day talks about where it's like not quite EDDM. It's just got slight like sorts on them. So you still get some of the lower postage rates, but you have a little bit, like you're not doing the rentals, you're not doing, you see what I'm saying? So
Sure.
we have, it's not technically EDDM, but you still have rates that are closer to EDDM. We also do smart mail where it's like, completely customized postcards, like with pearls, like personalized URLs. So like we're doing every kind of tool probably for direct mail. But I love things closer to EDDM, honestly, because it's like the per piece price is so much cheaper.
Yes. Yeah. It's way cheaper.
So yeah, so like that makes
But you're
a big
kind of
difference.
stuck with the whole route.
Yeah, so if you're in an area, like the quick and dirty way I would talk about this is like, well, are you in an area where doing whole routes, there's going to be a tremendous amount of waste? Like, I think if you answer the question of like, yes, it's like, well, maybe we should start, doing a list then, right? Because it's worth the extra cost. Because we've got pretty good tools where we can just run for a couple cents, we can get the lists. And then yeah, you're gonna maybe spend 5-10 cents more for the postage, but sometimes that makes sense because there's so much waste. So it's just a calculating thing for us, like in an area like Nashville where it's like, oh man, really mixed use. Every block, it's like you have $1 million house and you have a 300,000. That's like, oh gosh. And then half of them are rentals. It's just like, if you're in a market like that, it's like, I would say you should probably buy a list. But then there's others where it's like very homogeneous. Like we have like Atlanta, it's like whole neighborhoods are exactly the same, very wealthy. It's like, I don't really think we gain a lot by buying a list there. Like we might as well just go to every house. It's basically, they're all the same anyway.
Sure.
It's
Yeah. Like
saving
certain
money.
routes, you can find that like this whole route is great. So let's
Right.
go ahead and do the
So I
whole
think
thing.
like that's why I don't answer that question. Just like, oh yeah, you should always do EDDM. We're doing a big analysis right now, like the difference between doing blitzing and like what we call saturation style mailings. That's more what you're talking about.
Sure.
Because what we're not 100% sure about is how much benefit there is to like get that postcard there close to when we're painting. Because that's a big difference too, is like, well, if you use EDDM or other styles like that, it could be several weeks before the mail really gets on people's, to people's homes. By the time you print it and do everything, the timelines are longer.
So what you're saying is more of like just the frequency. So like if they get a little EDDM thing and then we're painting and then they get a blitz and then they get a flyer, it's like it's in their face for like.
Well, not just that. I'm just saying like how important is it for us to get that postcard to them within like a day or two of us painting?
Oh, okay.
And we're not sure about that, to be honest with you. I think our team right now, we're going through the data and there's like mixed results. That's like, because we got to do first class mail. It's all personalized. It's very expensive. Then, you might be spending like 60-70 cents a piece. And it's just like, well, is that worth the extra 20-30 cents, in that equation? What if we got that same postcard there 2 weeks later? It wasn't as personalized, but it still is a postcard at the house. It's like because you got to justify that extra cost.
Yeah.
Part of what you're paying that extra cost for is the speed and the personalization of the card. And what we're not convinced on my team is like, is that even worth it?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So this is another thing to think about, like as far as like how frequently you're showing up to that prospect. Like number one, they could see your yard sign, then they see the van and they get a postcard. And then maybe if you have door knockers, we're knocking that neighborhood, like just the kind of everything of like just almost abundantly making it clear, like we're going to let you know we're here kind of thing.
But I build out the marketing calendar. Like I build out the marketing plan before I build out the marketing calendar. So what you're talking about is like, well, I already know how much I'm going to spend each month on different things. I've already built that all out. I already know how many leads. I'm basically going to build the marketing calendar around that plan.
Okay. So, yeah, that makes sense. I have an annual plan as far as what we're spending and even per month, but like sequencing it is what I'm
Yep. And
struggling with.
it's not that easy, right? Because like going back to that one I just showed you where it's like, well, if only 40% of the leads come in the first month from like something like direct mail, you have to plan backwards a bit.
Right.
I'm like, okay, so, and we
That's
do that
kind
a
of,
lot.
yeah.
I think people are always surprised. They're like, Nate, why are you dropping postcards like late February? And I'm like, this is the answer to that question is like, we've done that sequencing and we know like, oh, if we want to have those kind of results in April and we think we could, and the demand, like it's a tricky situation because we can't get that far ahead or then there's no demand.
Right. Yeah.
So we're really looking at like, well, and that's why like when we talk about planning, there's certain ramps that I can't do. Like for instance, I can't go from 4% of your leads in February to 12% in March. Like it's too fast for marketing to do that, if that makes sense. And that's partly why.
You're talking about new leads, or you're just saying in general?
Yeah, in general, because like I don't have like the demand, like the ramp that the marketing team could do. That's just too fast. Like we probably could go like 4, 8, 12 is kind of what we found is like, yeah, we could get you to 12, but it might not be until, like, then it's like, well, maybe we need to pull the marketing back as far as we can. But if they're in a really northern climate, for instance, like we can't do a ton of exterior painting marketing like in early February. That's never going to work, right? So
what about like for reactivations? That's kind of like your ace that you have. Would y'all, as far as your partners, do they do like once or twice a year reactivations?
We've been getting better. Like we're nowhere near like Jason Phillips. Like he's doing so great. Like hats off to you, Jason. Like we're trying to be like him. Like where he's just doing it every week of the year all the time. We're getting better at it. Yeah. Like, and we're talking phone calls, mail, email, everything, all as much as you can. We're trying to, we want to get in front of people at least 4 times with like a real touch, like a phone call or something like that a year. And then I love like what's the big company out in Denver? They like go and visit everybody at least once a year. I'm forgetting their name right now.
Like their house?
Yeah. I know that sounds wild, but it's great. Just stop by, bring them something. So like, but I think like, again, like you have to add value. So don't just send emails to send emails. Don't just call to call. Don't just stop by their house to stop by their house. It's like weird. Like keep adding value, right? Like you show that you care about them, show that you care about their house. If you have something you think like that might be useful to them, send it to them, right? Like it's like, it doesn't matter whether it's an email, a text message, a phone call, a drop by, like they're all just tools. Like the question is, can you keep adding value? To me, that's the best reactivation. So your reactivation is only limited by your imagination on how you could add value.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was thinking more of like if you had an offer.
Well, an offer adds value, right? Like, so we do that, of course. Like, well, we only have, 5 painting slots left. If you want to get your house painted between now and the end of the year, like that's adding value. You're trying to look out for them, right? Like, hey, you might want to get your house painted before the end of the year. I've only got a couple slots left. Or, hey, we're running this sale. I could save you a little bit of money on your house, your paint project. Like that's adding value.
Sure. Okay.
It's not adding value if it's just, this is what I'd say. Like if you, and then you contact them 4 weeks later, it's like, hey, we got another offer. It's like, well, are you adding value? Maybe not. Right. Like this is where I've seen like, we've seen this too, where it's like, or the one-stop close. Sometimes those guys get into this trouble where it's like, if you sign today, we're going to give you this price that you'll never get again. And everybody knows, no, you could get that same price in a week.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, and so it's like
a higher pressure kind of sales thing.
You're not really adding value, right? You're just trying to create like urgency that doesn't exist. So,
it comes a lot from the window world, I found. But yeah,
I think so too. Yeah, and I think most painters are wise to like not like that, right? Because none of us really like it.
Yeah,
ourselves.
I've seen some guys crush it, but I think it really comes down to personality too. Like if it comes off as genuine. If you don't like doing it like me, and then I try to do it, I fail at it because I don't like to do it. But Mike, it's interesting.
What percentage of your gross are you planning for marketing next year? Like for the 1.4 million, like what's your marketing budget that you're thinking right now?
I would like to keep it under 10%, but like if I get to 8, that'd be great. But I would say like at most 10, and then just see if we can just do it better. See if I can beat that number.
Yeah, I think with how long you've been in business, but you're a really smart guy. and you're really into the numbers, way ahead of where most of your peers are. That's so great. Like that gives you a huge advantage. Like most people aren't thinking about anything like you are. But at first glance, with what I see, it's like, yeah, I'd probably start around 10% too. That sounds good to me. $140,000. I try to make a mix of digital and neighborhood marketing, but it's so much work to do flyers and to do door knocking. So I probably do a little more direct mail. And then in the years ahead, when you're a little bigger and, between 3 and 5 million, you could get into some of those other things, right? But right now it's like, oh man, the 1 to 2 million too is really tough because you're like big enough where you're starting to not, be involved in everything in your business, but it's like, and you're starting to let go of the reins. You got a sales rep, you got a project manager, you got someone in the office maybe, but you're not quite big enough where you're not involved in all of them. So it's like, it's pretty tough. Like I think that time actually between like 800,000 and 1.8 million, somewhere in that range is maybe the hardest, honestly.
Yeah, I actually applied that. Very true, because it's like now you have the overhead there, and so it's like now you're almost forced to and if you don't, then you're just not going to make any money. So it's like before you had the freedom of like you can actually make more money, and versus kind of thing. So now it's like now that we have the overhead, it's almost like you're just kind of forced to kind of push through that little glass ceiling, and if you don't, you're not going to make much money, if at all.
Yeah, exactly. You're making the transition between working in the business and working on the business. Like you're making the transition to what I mean by that is like you are going to be moving into building people and processes. That's the business you're going to get into. Right now, you're running a painting business, which is like you're making sure you aren't painting. I get it. You already way moved off the tool. It doesn't sound like maybe you were ever on the tools. Like, so you already did that. Okay. So like you've already done that transition, but then you move into the transition of like, well, you're running a business, but now like you move into like, well, I'm really building up people and processes. There's people that do everything. I just build them, if that makes sense. And that's a big transition too.
It is. Yeah. It's like you got to, just like everything, I've got like 30 marketing books, and I'm just going to read through them for the next couple months and try to absorb as much as I can. But at the same time, then also once I crack this egg, so to speak, of marketing, it's like, then there's another egg to crack of development and systems, for each of those roles. So it's just a never ending kind of, and then of course, then there's recruiting,
Feel free to send me your, budget if you want. I can look over it via email. Sure. So when you do get that, if you want me to just take a peek at it, I can. I probably can't spend a tremendous amount of time on it, obviously, because they don't pay me to do that. But I'd be happy to look over it for you.
I appreciate that. Just a snapshot of like, hey, I think you can spend more money here, and hey, your overhead's too fat. Quit eating out or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like if I just see your numbers, like I have little red flags that I see as you are showing me stuff. I'm like, oh, you should pay attention to this, or like just because I look at that stuff all day long, so it's easy for me to pick out like, oh, that's too high for Google or whatever it might be. So, okay, awesome. Michael. Well, if you need something else, just send me an email. Otherwise, man, it was so fun hanging out with you today.
Yeah, it was great chat. I appreciate it. And what y'all are doing in the space is just really helpful. And I'm just excited to kind of grow and kind of learn from everyone.
Yeah, forget about what we're doing. You got to $1 million in like, what did you say, 18, 20 months?
Yeah, about 20 months, yeah.
Yeah, man, that's extraordinary. So I'm so excited for you. I hope we're talking a year from now and you're telling me about how you got to 1.6 and now you're thinking about 3 million in 2026.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Yeah, once something's done. Yeah.
All right. Take care, Mike.
Thanks, Nate.